All right, we are back on the Ourlads Football Network. I'm your host, Greg DePalma, and hopefully you joined us for our discussion last week when we had our first mock draft, a live mock draft for 2024. This time around, we're going to take a look at team needs, 32 team needs, not all on this video. We're going to do the AFC on this video. NFC will hopefully be on next week's show, so stay tuned for that. That's why you need to subscribe here on the Ourlads Football channel so you never miss one of these videos, including the live ones. So make sure you click that notification bell as well. And glad to have you here. So let me introduce the panel once again. Jon Cooper, the longest tenured on this panel for sure at Ourlads.com. How's it going, Jon?
Doing good.
All right. Also, let's introduce Dave Syvertsen to the program. Dave, of course, been a big-time scout here for Ourlads. How's it going, Dave?
Awesome. A couple weeks away from the draft. Really glad to see the draft guide show up on my doorstep yesterday, and it's just fun to go through the book and look at all the fruits of our labor. It was a fun process, and now we get to sit back and see what happens.
Yes, we're already getting excellent reviews from some of the insiders that we've sent the magazines to and the PDFs to. So everybody likes it. It's a new format as well, which I think is kind of cool. So they did a really good job this year with the draft guide. Jon, hope you understand that coming from what I've heard and also from me personally. So great job.
Well, we appreciate that. It was a lot of work for a lot. We put a lot of time into that thing.
Yep, we understand that for sure.
We want to make it better every year.
That's it. That's all you can do. Strive to be the best. To remain the best. Let's just say that. All right. Also joining us, Tucker Moss, who is speaking of depth charts at Ourlads. And we'll be posting the depth charts up on the screen maybe from time to time to get an opportunity to join in with us. And if not, just check out the Ourlads.com website. Check out the depth charts as we're going along here. And it's not going to be in alphabetical order, but you can follow along. It's real easy. It's real easy to navigate on Ourlads. But Tucker's in charge of updating that depth chart on a daily basis. Good to have you here, Tucker.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get my 2 cents on each of these, and let's get started on this.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. We're going to get started with the Baltimore Ravens. And Jon, you're up first as Baltimore is a team, as we all know, is really close to getting to the Super Bowl. So what do you think they're going to need to get over the hump as far as this particular draft is concerned?
Well, the Ravens have lost several good free agent football players. They lost Patrick Queen, an outstanding inside linebacker. They lost offensive tackle Morgan Moses, traded. They lost a couple of guards that were starters. So, there's they lost Geno Stone, who led the AFC in interceptions. So, they've lost some outstanding players. Those just to name a few. They've lost Jadeveon Clowney, who was a kind of refurbished edge rusher last year. So there's some definite needs. So they've done a good job of bringing in some other players, including Derrick Henry, who basically replaces J.K. Dobbins, who missed most of the season, and Gus Edwards. So they've done a good job in free agency, and they recently brought back Kyle Van Noy, outstanding outside linebacker, who they wanted an edge rusher and they wanted a veteran because they've got some really good young talent in the edge area. So that still remains an area they'll probably look at. But their biggest need, in my opinion, is in the offensive line. Losing, the 2 starting guards, Zeitler and Simpson, along with Morgan Moses, they're going to have to, retool there a little bit. So they're going to need a couple of offensive linemen in this draft. They don't have a backup center of note right now. So, they're going to look at interior, but they're also probably going to take a look at the future at tackle. Got a couple of real nice players in Daniel Falele and Patrick McCarry, who's kind of their Swiss Army knife offensive lineman who can play every position on the line. And quite frankly, that may be where he's best suited, is to be able to do that. And they used him last year rotating, helping out Ronnie Stanley when he was nicked up. Ronnie Stanley's a veteran. 1 year left on his contract. They're going to have to look at a tackle possibly down the line that can replace him. And the right tackle, do they trust Daniel Falele to take over that spot? So I think right tackle, somebody that can play right, maybe left, has some versatility, and somebody that can play inside is a big need. they lost a couple good wide receivers. They're going to need to a couple guys that they're going to need to replace. So Zay Flowers coming back is tremendous. They re-signed Aguilar, bringing him back. Rashad Bateman, who really has not established himself yet, but he's back. Tylan Wallace is back. So they've got some guys, but they want to get another elite receiver. So I think when they get down to that spot in the draft late in the first round, the best player available at one of those two spots, I think, is the direction that they'll go. And down the line, they're going to have to get another linebacker, although drafting Trenton Simpson last year, and he played very well in the last game of the season. Looks like he's already kind of solved that problem, but they still have some needs in an area of depth.
Yeah, and speaking of wide receiver, let's keep in mind, too, Flowers coming off that domestic violence issue. Bateman, he's on the final year of his rookie deal. So, yeah, wide receiver. It's interesting. Just last year, everybody said, the wide receiver situation is taken care of. And just shows you in the NFL, nothing's taken care of for very long. By the way, I want to let everybody know that when you do see the depth charts, if you see the colors, in case you don't know this, if you see the colors, those players are the free agents that were added to the team. So every other color is the same except what would you call that's like what kind of color would you call that? Aqua? Like an aqua color. Yeah. So that aqua color, those are the free agents that have been added to the roster. And also for the rest of the panel, before I move on to the next person, and that is going to be Tucker coming up with Denver. Before I do that, if anybody wants to jump in and say, you know what, I think there's another position or two that I think this particular team would be interested in for the NFL draft, definitely just go ahead and jump out. Say what's on your mind before we move on to the next team. All right, so let's go to Denver and Tucker. The Denver Broncos, year 2 under Sean Payton. Now I was going to say losses, but they cut bait with Russell Wilson, Justin Simmons. Those are some big pieces and a lot of money gone out the door. So, Tucker, what do the Denver Broncos have to do to get better with the NFL draft?
Yeah, the Broncos, they're kind of a tough one. They're in a tough spot here because they committed a lot last year to Russell Wilson and to trading for Sean Payton as well. So they don't really have that much draft capital. I mean, in the second round especially is where they're missing a lot. So they have the 12th overall pick, but it's kind of hard because now they're stuck with a quarterback room that's Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci, which is not where you want to be, really. No offense to those guys. But if they want to move up, it's going to be pretty tough because they don't have a second round pick to do that with. So it's kind of a tricky spot. They could try to take a quarterback at 12, certainly, but those very top high end options are going to be gone, most likely in the top 5 picks. If they want to look at someone like Bo Nix or Michael Penix, that's possible. Some people would say that's too high for them, but if they love one of those guys, that'd be great. Otherwise, yeah, moving on from, they traded Jerry Jeudy, which is obviously one of their key receivers last year. Along with Justin Simmons, who's been like a leader on their defense for years now. And they lost their starting center, Lloyd Cushenberry, as well. But they brought in some guys to hopefully fill in that were kind of cheap options because they didn't have too much cap space to work with. They're kind of eating a lot of the Russell Wilson cap this year, like $50 million cap hit, I think, this year, and like a 30 next year. So they could have swapped it around, but they opted to take more of the hit now. So it's looking more like they're going to go like further in on 2025 rather than this year. But that's not to say they're not going to try to win. They have Sean Payton as their head coach. So they brought in Josh Reynolds to be the replacement for Jerry Jeudy, like in their 3 wide receiver sets. I have just Mims going to the slot, Jerry Jeudy on the outside. Josh Reynolds on the outside. And then, they also lost Josie Jewell as well at linebacker. So they brought in Cody Barton, who started. He started every game that he played in last year for Washington. And they have Jonas Griffith coming back, but he's just had injury issues the last 2 years. He was pretty good when he was playing, though. And they drafted Drew Sanders last year, who played both inside and outside linebacker last year for them. But like their main needs, though, I'd say they could still go for receiver. They could sit with what they have, but they probably want to get someone younger. I mean, Cortland Sutton is good, but he's never taken that next step to be elite in the league yet. they got Malcolm Roach. They lost a few D linemen, Mike Purcell and Jonathan Harris. They got Malcolm Roach because he's familiar with Peyton from the Saints. He was more of a rotational guy. He's like a run stuffer. DJ Jones was thought that he's going to be a cap casualty, but they're going to bring him back for one more year. Zach Allen's a good player. They just kind of need someone aside from him who's like a star on the line there. And same goes with edge. They have some good, like solid kind of number 2 edges, but not a star like pass rusher. So like Baron Browning and Jonathan Cooper and Nick Benito are all pretty solid. Not like a star-studded number 1 guy like Nick Bosa or something like that. Otherwise, just obviously Pat Surtain is one of the best corners, but they probably are going to look to try to get a better starting outside corner alongside him. Because right now it's just Damari Mathis and Riley Moss could go there too. But besides that, they lack kind of depth there. So they have like a lot of ways they could go. It'll be interesting to see how they do it because like their main capital, like I said, is the number 12 overall pick. And then they have like 60 picks until they go again. So it'll be cool to see how they spend that really high-end pick for this year.
Yeah, everything. Teams that are definitely looking like they are going to trade down, and Denver has to be on top of the list. Like you said, based on the fact they don't have a second-round pick, and the obvious need is quarterback. But is the quarterback going to? I mean, are they really going to reach at that number? And Penix would be the guy you would think. It seems a little too early to be taking Penix. So I think the Broncos makes a lot of sense to trade down. But yeah, because like you said, Tucker, they have a lot of needs. So, and they've already started the offseason with a lot of big moves to open up and shred and open the necessary cap space that they can use on some future young players. So keep an eye on the Broncos. There's going to be a lot of movement, starting with that potential first pick trading down in the draft. All right, next up, let's go with Dave as we stay in the AFC West with Las Vegas. And there seems to be a lot of excitement in Las Vegas nowadays. You know, the fans seem happy about Pierce being maintained as the head coach. But the big question, of course, is going to be at quarterback. So what are they going to do at quarterback? Do they think Aiden O'Connell is the answer? And what about the rest of the lineup? What are their needs, Dave?
Well, I do think in the AFC West, in a division where Kansas City is going to be in your way for the foreseeable future, without a doubt, you're going to have to be able to find a way to score a lot of points. And can Aiden O'Connell be that guy? Let's not forget, he went 500 in his first year on a subpar team as a 4th-round pick. So I do believe he deserves a shot at the job. A 2-year deal was given to Gardner Minshew, and he's used to being that stopgap, that bridge quarterback to the future.
Decent
great
player.
Veteran presence for a guy like O'Connell, or maybe they do draft a quarterback. If they are in a position where they have a high enough grade on a quarterback that they like a lot, I do believe they will pull that trigger. But I would be very surprised at their first-round pick if that guy is there. So, yes, the Tom Telesco, the new general manager that came over from the Chargers, he had 11 drafts with the Chargers. If you take out the Justin Herbert draft where they drafted a quarterback, half of his first-round picks were spent on offensive and defensive line. And you could see what was the first splash move they did. They put all their eggs in that Christian Wilkins basket to pair with the all-pro Max Crosby. I mean, that is as good as a 1-2 punch inside-outside that you're going to find in the NFL. I still think, even though they used a first-round pick last year on Tyree Wilson and Malcolm Kuntz is starting to break out now that he's been in the league for a couple of years, there is room for another impact pass rusher, inside or outside. Tyree Wilson gives them that versatility. So that's the number 2 move. Even though they use so much money on Christian Wilkins, I think if you're going to take quarterback out and let that O'Connell-Minshew combo play under center in 2024, getting another dynamic pass rusher to give this defense a real identity that someone like the Chiefs even have to plan around would be a really smart move. And it kind of falls in line with what Tom Telesco likes to do as a shot caller. And I'm going to throw the defensive backfield. They put an experiment with Marcus Peters at corner last year. It did not work. However, Jack Jones comes in from New England after being waived, who Antonio Pierce recruited at Arizona State. There's a personal relationship there. And Jack Jones, nobody denies his talent. It's the off-field, it's the character, it's the maturity where he's run into trouble both in college and now in the NFL. But now that Pierce is controlling him, for lack of a better term, they might have shored that spot up with him. He's a good football player. He always has been. Jacorian Bennett had a roller coaster rookie year, up and down. The most impressive thing we can say about him still to this day is that he ran a fast 40. We don't know. We don't know if he can be a real starting NFL caliber corner. So I think corner is going to be very much high on that list as well. So that's where I'm looking right now. If a quarterback meets the value, meets the grade, meets the slot, I do think they'll pull that trigger in year one of a new regime. And if not, I think you're looking at offensive or defensive line or defensive back.
Same situation as Denver. They're right there, 12-13, and they both well, Denver, we know needs a quarterback. We don't know if Las Vegas needs a quarterback. They might just decide to use one of their other picks on a quarterback, maybe later in the draft, and give Aiden O'Connell a shot.
Yeah.
So, all right. Next up, Dave. John. You are back up again with the Buffalo Bills and Brandon Beane. I believe Brandon is a 2-time Executive of the Year, so he seems to know what he's doing. They have a new defensive coordinator and Bobby Babich that takes over. Of course, Joe Brady took over midseason last season. Bills, they've made a lot of moves this offseason, a lot of moves. Of course, the big one being their wide receiver's gone, their big-time wide receiver. So what do you think they have to do to replenish some of these players in the draft?
Well, they've got a lot of needs. They had some salary cap issues that they had to deal with, starting with last year. So this, I don't know if you want to call it a rebuild, but some of this started a year ago with some guys that let go, like Tre'Davious White, who was an outstanding corner. But, right now, receivers the biggest need. It was the biggest need, in our opinion, before Diggs was traded. So, right now they had Justin Shorter moves up to the number one. Shakir moves up from slot to number 2, and they signed Curtis Samuel from Washington to be the slot receiver. So they need some help there at the wide receiver. So I can see with a good wide receiver draft this year, that's going to be something they're going to attack, and I think they're going to look at more than one, receiver. They're going to look for number 1 in the draft, I believe, and they're not going to do much more, I don't think, with free agency. The secondary was surprisingly good last year after losing White. They still lost a little more this year. They lost Saron Neal, who's their big nickel. In their scheme, they used 2 nickelbacks and rotated them. And Neal was a solid player for them. So they need to address sub-package help and depth in the secondary. So I believe they're going to be looking at the safety position. I think they've got to take a look at, some cornerback depth. Christian Benford was surprisingly a great replacement for White last year, but they still going to need some help there. Tight end is a big hole. They don't have the receiver at tight end that they've had. Right now it's kind of a black hole there a little bit. You've got a couple guys, Tremble, Thomas, but I can see them. It's not a great tight end class, but I can see them taking a look at the tight end position, as part of what they need to do. They always like to have good defensive linemen. In the past, the Bills were a very strong rotational defensive line team, and they used a lot of players. And I still think they want to do that. So with that in mind, I think they're going to look for another defensive edge rusher, and they're going to look for another interior defender. Not a great year, in my opinion, for either of those positions in terms of as the depth gets pretty thin as you move down the line. But there's some solid players there and some guys that have some upside that they can take a look at. It's a solid group coming back. You still have, some pretty decent edge guys in Russo and Espinosa. But, you've lost some things too. Some guys have left your team, and so you're going to have to replace those guys in terms of the rotation. There's a big hole in the depth at the interior at the 3 technique. So they're going to have to take a look at somebody behind Ed Oliver. that can play in a rotation. So, those in my world, those are the things that they have to do. Now, obviously, Matt Milano's coming back off an injury, so they're going to have to take a look at a linebacker. I think the linebackers are going to go off the board late, and there's probably about 20 to 25 draftable off-the-ball linebackers. So I got to believe Buffalo's going to be taking a look at that position as well. I believe that Milano will be back. Terrell Bernard did a pretty good job last year, but he's undersized. But he's still exceeded expectations in a lot of ways. So they've got some holes to fill. In some ways, it's a rebuilding team, but there's still a solid roster there. They really have to address, the offense, that receiver core. That's going to be, I think, the biggest area of need moving forward.
All right. Next up, the Houston Texans. We go back to Tucker, Houston, or Houston Tucker, and what a big season it was for them. So how are they going to improve their team after a blockbuster draft last year? And, of course, no first-round draft pick.
Yeah, they're even without a first-round draft pick, they've been the story of the offseason here. Made 2 huge splash moves, trading for Stephon Diggs and signing Danielle Hunter away from the Vikings. Their receiver room, they already had 2 really good receivers in Nico Collins and Tank Dell. And adding Diggs there is just absurd. Their depth there is crazy too. Noah Brown, John Mechie, Robert Woods all behind them, and Xavier Hutchinson, third string. That's a great wide receiver room. Other than that, they got Joe Mixon too for running back, replacing Singletary. Their offense is pretty good. They just need their line to stay healthy because last year they had crazy injuries there. They could try to get a guard or 2 as depth, but otherwise. Or compete at left guard. I know Kenyon Green hasn't exactly panned out how they wanted to so far, but other than that, their offense looks pretty dang good on paper here. Their defense, then they were looking to. Edge would have been a need, but them getting Danielle Hunter is huge. Having someone across from Will Anderson, that's got to be one of the best duos in the league here for edge rushers. They got Azeez Al-Shaair from the Titans, who was formerly on the 49ers, though, so he worked with D'Amico Ryans there. Their linebackers look good. Christian Harris was great last year. They did lose Blake Cashman and Perryman, but I think they'll be fine still. They have good depth there, too, with Jake Hansen and Neville Hewitt. They brought in Delshon Phillips, but he's more special teams. Their main need probably is D-tackle and cornerback. Cornerback is pretty important, too, here because actually, for them, you can kind of look at their signings. Like, they made a splash signing at wide receiver, got Diggs. That's all they did there. They also got a splash signing at edge rusher. That's all they did there as well. But the places where they signed a bunch of guys are the ones where they're going to try to draft some, I think. So, D-tackle, they got 4 guys, first string, second string. On cornerback and safety, they brought in 5 guys there in second string. Jeff Okudah is starting at right cornerback right now, but that could change easily. They just need someone solid across from Stingley. They could definitely bring in someone else to compete at nickel as well with Desmond King, who they brought back again last year. Jimmy Ward is entering the final year of his contract, I know, and he was injured a lot last year. So safety is also a place they could look to improve. So it made sense that they traded out of the first because they don't necessarily have a glaring need right now. They need a star player but they're trying to get more picks to solidify their depth for the future. So I like what they're doing so far here.
Dave and I had a nice conversation last year about the trade. The Houston, we battled that, whether that was the smart way to go about doing business. You know what? It sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So far, it has looked like it's worked for Houston, but still a long way to go. All right, Dave, you are next, and you've got the Miami Dolphins right now. So what do you think they're going to need come draft time?
I mean, the defensive line, that they lost quality in Christian Wilkins. Obviously, he's been, what do I have here? He has been top 4 in pressures on the team each of the past 3 seasons. He's been the top interior pass rusher 2 of the last 3 years. So they lost him, and you can see all the aqua color and defensive tackle. They went for quantity to try and replace him. That's the old Moneyball approach, right? You're not going to replace Christian Wilkins with one guy. You're going to try to bring in 5 or 6 pieces to replace all of that impact and production. The problem is you might not have roster space to keep all those guys. So You have a couple underrated names. I love Tart, just a little banged up last year. Neville Gallimore has flashed in Dallas, but again, to me, that's not the answer. He's a great guy to have on your depth chart, but I wouldn't want him starting. Deshaun Hand, who is currently in line to start, that's a rough spot for me. I think this team has a spot open to find another pass rusher for that defensive line, because remember, Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb, they're both listed right there, but they both had significant season-ending injuries. Phillips in November, Chubb in late December. So who knows? Are they actually going to be back and ready for the start of the season? And when they do come back, will they get back to their normal selves? I mean, law of average says they're not going to hit their 100% level of play at any point in the front half of the season, maybe even the entire season. So to me, those stopgap signings at D tackle / D end, and the fact that you have two guys coming off serious injuries, that really does exemplify the fact that they need to get another body for that interior. And the positive is it can be inside or outside. They don't have to, go after one spot. Just get the top available defensive lineman at some point. At wide receiver, Cedric Wilson came in and did not do much. They didn't when he was signed from Dallas a couple of years ago. Braxton Berrios is a guy that will occasionally touch the ball, but he's there to return the ball. The guy to watch is the kid they drafted in 2022, Ezunkama from Texas Tech. He's had 2 targets in 2 years. So he's a huge unknown. You can't plan around a guy like that. So I think as early as round 1, knowing what this team is built on, wide receiver is very much in play. Remember, they do not have a 3rd or 4th round pick. They have their 1st and their 2nd. And I would not be a surprise at all in this really rich wide receiver group to get another weapon for McDaniel to play with.
Okay, let us now turn our attention to the Cincinnati Bengals. John, what do you think? Duke Tobin has been running that draft room for Cincinnati for quite a long time. What do you think he's going to do here?
Yeah, Dad Bill has been helping him a little bit too. So, yeah, they've got a pretty good core there. But anyway, the Bengals, a lot of people have looked at their team and, why can't they quite get over the hump? And, they obviously didn't have a great season last year. Part of it was the secondary was a problem. Their defensive line was a little bit of a problem. So I think those are 2 areas they've got to really address. The offensive line they have to address as well. I mean, they lost Jonah Williams to Arizona, but they picked up Trent Brown, but he's a veteran and he's on a 1-year deal, I believe, coming from New England. So, and Karras, at the center is getting up in years. So they're going to look at some depth. They're going to look at right tackle, somebody for the future. They got to protect Burrow. They can't have him running for his life all the time. So that's an issue. Although I think they're solid right now, but they have to think of the future. The defensive line has been a problem, especially the interior. People have been able to run the ball on them. And, so they have to address that. They lost, a pretty good player in Reeder, in Detroit signing him. And they signed, I think they picked Sheldon Rankins, to replace him. Rankins is a little bit more of a pass rusher. And they need that too. But, they have to have more there on that interior. They want a solid rotation. So I could see them, taking a look at the tackle position. And they also, could use some depth, on the edge. They've got some solid players there, but they could use a little more. The secondary, the safety position was a problem last year. They didn't have a real leader back there. Signing Geno Stone and bringing Von Bell back after letting him walk was a great move. Geno Stone will be a big help. He was a great player for the Ravens last year. They're going to need another corner, so they're going to have to draft somebody. Uzi is they let him walk. They've got a couple of 2nd-round picks that are going to start there right now, but and Turner and Cam Taylor-Britt, and those are 2 solid players. But they're going to need a little more. They're going to need to take a look at the nickel position as well. So those are the big areas of need. They could probably upgrade the edge a little bit, especially the depth. There. And, they've got good wide receivers. There's talk that T. Higgins was, going to be traded, but so far he's still there. So, but still, they're probably going to look at that position in the draft as well.
Yeah, they could use a little size, too, at corner. Turner, small guy, as you know. Maybe if they go corner, look out for someone with a little bit more muscle than what they have there right now.
Well, that's a big need. They need a nickel too, a potential nickel. But I think, like you say, there's height there. There's some guys down the road at corner that have what you're looking for there.
All right. Before we move on, I want to remind everybody, this is the draft guide. It just came out. I got it. You guys got it? Everybody got it already?
Somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere.
I got it in the other room.
There you go. So this is it, and you can check it out at ourlads.com. And look, if you don't want to wait for it, and if you're not the type of person that really cares much about holding on to one of these babies, and you want it in PDF form, you get it like that. Just there it is. There's the link to the page at ourlads.com. You can make a really quick decision there. And by the way, don't forget also that not only will you have the draft guide coming up, which is available right now, but the draft review guide will be out in June. So we'll be getting started on that pretty much right after the draft. So, but right now you've got the draft guide available, PDF form. You'll get it in seconds. And if you want to wait for the guide, which I would, I mean, this is awesome, old school, but I love it. You can get them both and just check both boxes. And also don't forget the review guides coming out as well. All right, now let's talk about the Colts, Tucker. And this is a big offseason for the Colts. Matter of fact, their GM, I think he's Chris Ballard is under the gun here. I think this is one of those drafts that could make or break whether or not he's going to be there for a while.
Certainly, this is a huge year. They need Richardson to stay healthy here, and they'll be a really fun team to watch. Mainly, I mean, their big things I was kind of watching this offseason was Kenny Moore and Julian Blackmon, who they at first were letting kind of test the market, but they ended up bringing both of them back, which I thought was a huge help because their secondary looked just completely void of talent without those two guys. With them back, that solidifies the slot spot and Blackmon back as the top safety. Safety is still a place they could address. The other spot, it's going to be Nick Cross versus Rodney Thomas competing for that. Nick Cross just doesn't have that much experience yet, so it's kind of an unknown. But they could look to reinforce that room a bit. But they do kind of need another outside corner. I assume Juju Brents will start one of the spots, but across from him right now, it's going to be either Dallas Flowers, who missed a lot of last year. I think he went on IR in week 5. Him and Jalen Jones, who was a 7th-round pick last year, they were both the guys that are going to compete for that spot right now. But they could easily look for a cornerback in the first round. If they get Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold make it to them at 15, I'm sure they'd definitely consider getting one of those guys. Otherwise, their edge rushers are pretty good, but they don't have a star. Kwity Paye was kind of inconsistent. Ebicom had a pretty good year. Their D tackles look really good, really deep room. And then the main other place I was looking at was wide receiver because they did bring back Pittman, and then they got Josh Downs last year. He'll be their slot, but Alec Pierce hasn't really broken out yet. He's been inconsistent so far. I could definitely see them trying to take an outside receiver in the first, like Brian Thomas or something like that. They can kind of go with, since they have so many places they could address, they can kind of go with, it's a good spot. They can go with the best player available at 15 because there's a lot of good options there that fill their needs. But other than that, yeah, I mean, as long as they get Richardson some help, then they'll be a really fun team to watch.
Yeah, keep an eye on the fact that even though those edge rushers combined for 27 or 30 sacks almost, 2 of them contracts are going to have to be taken care of. And Ebicom's a free agent next year. So they've got a lot of decisions to make along the defensive line. And you want to be proactive. That's the name of the game. All right, next up, the New England Patriots. So it's time for Dave to pop back on again. The first draft post Bill Belichick.
Post Bill Belichick, but the head coach Strad Mayo is a Bill Belichick disciple as a player and a coach. And the new GM, Elliot Wolf, he's been the director of scouting. So they didn't really turn that much over And, Elliott Wolf has said they want to build this team. He comes from the Packers. We know that name, right? That's how he has said he wants to build the team like the Packers have built their teams in the past. And that's how he wants to model the approach after. And it's got to start off with quarterback. They signed Jacoby Brissett, and Jacoby Brissett is essentially the quarterback that the league wants as your holdover / transition quarterback to the next stage. That's why he was brought to Indianapolis when Andrew Luck went down or left the game for a year and then tried to come back. That's why Miami signed him to back up Tua in Miami. That's why he went to Cleveland. When Deshaun Watson was suspended, he was the holdover there. And then last year he was backing up Sam Howell. He's a guy that can start. He can keep things together. But really his main purpose will be to help groom the next quarterback. And, where the Patriots need the most help on their current roster, which is depleted of talent. It really is on both sides of the ball. But specifically on offense, this is where the draft is at its strongest. You have quarterbacks. You have multiple franchise caliber guys at the top of the draft. They need a wide receiver. There's a ton of wide receivers, days 1, 2, and 3. And then they need an offensive tackle. They need a left tackle. That's a huge spot. I mean, do you want Connor McDermott really, manning the blind side? However, what did they do? At right tackle, they re-signed Mike Onwenu to a big contract. Right tackle. Is it possible they want to have him protect the blind side of a certain lefty quarterback that might be able to be had in round 2? And if they do that, what would they do with their first pick? And part of me wants to say wide receiver, because Demario Douglas, a rookie 6th round pick, led this team in yards last year. Ezekiel Elliott led the team in catches.
Yeah.
That could have worked 20 years ago, but if there's a team that needs the wide receiver the most in the NFL, it's the Patriots. But I circle back to Elliott Wolf and that line that he's talked about using the Packers as a model to build a roster. What's one thing they never did with Aaron Rodgers? It was use a 1st round pick on a wide receiver. So I'm kind of torn at what they're doing. I mean, I think they're going to lean quarterback at 3 overall. And my guess is wind up with Drake May, if not Jaden Daniels, if Washington passes on him. But that's where the draft's going to start with them, is what do they do at 3? I could see them, not everyone agrees with this, trading out of 3.
I agree.
Some of these teams are going to get into a bidding war because they need so much help on both sides of the ball that why not pick up future assets and still be in a position to get your tackle, to get your wide receiver, and just simply punt on quarterback until next year. So that's where I see them leaning towards: quarterback, wide receiver, and offensive line. And they don't have any running backs signed as of right now in past this year. So that's another spot just to keep an eye on, maybe towards day 3.
Okay, let's talk about the Cleveland Browns. And the Browns are another team without a 1st-round draft pick. But you know what? This is the last year they're without one of those 1st-round draft picks with that Deshaun Watson trade. So you're up now, Dave and John, And the fact is that even without that 1st-round draft pick, though, the Browns have a lot of talent on their team. What do they have to do, though, after the 1st round, since they don't have a pick?
Well, looking at it, they are very talented. So a 1st-round pick is not as big of a deal for them. I mean, they've got a great team. They've got depth at a lot of positions. But, there's still big needs. I mean, they got torched, in some games in terms of their pass defense. So they have to address that. They need a corner very badly. I'd say that's their number 1 need. Martin Emerson, just kind of marginal player. Their safety play was okay, but it can definitely be upgraded. I mean, Thornhill and Delpit, they're solid players, but there's not a lot of depth there. Denzel Ward was an adequate corner. He played well for the most part, but they have to upgrade that secondary. That's going to be, in my opinion, the number 1 need. So they can use a little more depth on the edge. Darius Smith was re-signed, but he's getting up in years. Myles Garrett is, probably the best pass rusher in the NFL right now, and he gets a lot of attention. So you want somebody on the other side, if they're going to use, a half slide protection, if their pass protection is geared to stop Myles Garrett, various protection schemes, it's going to give whoever the other guy is on the other side some great opportunities. So they need some depth. They need some rotational depth. I think they're going to look on the edge. and possibly an interior defender, as they're getting long in the tooth. Those two tackles, Tomlinson and Harris, as is Zadarius Smith. So that's going to be an area that they're going to address down the line. They're going to look at some young developmental type players, which is what Schwartz likes. He likes those kind of guys that can just come screaming off the edge too. Running back, they've got Nick Chubb coming off an ACL injury. They got pretty good play. Kareem Hunt came back a little bit and played. Jerome Ford was a nice player, but I got to believe somewhere down the line they're going to look to add another running back with the unknowns of where Nick Chubb is going to be when he returns. Pretty solid linebacker core, but Jordan Hicks, he's up in years. So they're going to look at an off-the-ball linebacker in this draft, I believe, as a depth piece that can eventually step in. They're going to look at some guys to help them on special teams as well. And again, they'll continue to look at, a wide receiver. Obviously, it looks like a really strong position. Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, bringing Jerry Jeudy in. So they've even traded more picks to get him. So, that's a solid 3 receivers right there. But I could see them looking to add, even a little bit more there. And they'll look at depth at the other positions. But this is a good roster that has a couple of glaring weaknesses, but they can address that in this draft.
And we'll find out whether or not are they going to go into camp with those 3 tackles. What a luxury to have those 3 tackles on their roster. Of course, Wills has not lived up to his billing. Maybe he's the guy that could get traded if they're looking to add another asset.
Well, if he's not living up to his billing, he's going to be tough to trade.
That's true, too. All right. Next up, the Jacksonville Jags. So Tucker, Jacksonville, disappointing year 2 of Doug Peterson era. What do they need to do in this year's NFL draft?
Yeah, so first of all, the big news today was the Josh Allen contract. So that really helps their edge rushers because that was a main kind of need that I thought that they had because it was kind of an unknown how that was going to go. He was franchise tagged, but they ended up working out a deal this morning. So their starting edge duo is back for the foreseeable future here with Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen. They did lose Ridley to the Tennessee Titans, their rival. They brought in Gabe Davis, but their plan was hopefully to have Gabe Davis and Calvin Ridley there. But now they kind of have a need there on the outside. Christian Kirk is a good player, but I'd prefer to have. I mean, Zay Jones was good at times last year, but he missed a lot of time to injury. I'd like to have a better top tier outside wide receiver there for them. Otherwise, they lost Darius Williams, cornerback, and they lost Rayshon Jenkins, safety. They brought in Darnell Savage to either Darnell Savage or Antonio Johnson will replace Rayshon Jenkins at strong safety, and one of them will play slot. I don't really know which one at this point. At cornerback, though, I think that's the biggest need. They have Tyson Campbell, who's a good up and coming corner, one of the young corners that are really good in this league. Outside of him, they signed Ronald Darby to kind of be that, kind of like Okuda for the Texans, kind of just a sort of a fill-in guy if they don't end up drafting someone like high capital. He could certainly start for them this next year, but beside that, they kind of just have some young unproven options like Monteric Brown and Christian Braswell. The other spot I'd look to is the defensive line. Eric Armstead was a huge that'll help them a lot on their D line, but they still kind of need help there. Like Roy Robertson Harris can start for them, but Davon Hamilton only started I think 2 games last year for them, but he was kind of coming off an injury. They might look to get someone to upgrade at nose. Otherwise, their interior, they got Mitch Morse to replace Luke Fortner, so they're going to compete there. But I think the most glaring is receiver and cornerback here for the Jaguars.
All right. So that is, by the way, I think from what I heard, they let Williams go and they brought in Darby because it was a better scheme fit. And then we'll find out who starts at nickel as well. That was a conversation that even we had not too long ago when John Osher with Jaguars.com was a guest on our channel a few weeks back.
Yeah, I should have mentioned the new DC Ryan Nielsen. He plays a lot of press man, and Ronald Darby is brought in for that reason.
Yep.
And then the slot thing. Yeah, I've heard Antonio Johnson, but then I also recently read about they might put Savage there, so I'm not really sure which one will end up being the starting safety or the slot. So it'll be interesting to see how they do it.
Okay. Next up, the New York Jets. And Dave, you've got my team. So
pressure.
Yeah, you better believe it. What do you think the Jets are going to be looking at for the NFL draft?
Yeah, I mean, they get to run it back, back to Hard Knocks. The excitement that this entire city, this entire organization had last year after the Aaron Rodgers trade. We all know how it went, and it's just a complete nightmare and from every angle. They get to run it back, and and this is the one thing that the signings of Morgan Moses and Tyron Smith, at tackle, they're not bad signings, but it continues to show that they're trying to put Band-Aids over wounds that need stitches. It's the offensive line has been a problem here for years. I mean, look at Mekhi Becton. He still has not been signed. And this is the guy that you were hoping was going to protect Aaron Rodgers last year. And, that these moves they were kind of forced into them, and hopefully they work out. But these are guys that they don't play as much. Morgan Moses is a little bit more durable, but Tyron Smith, the constant with him is that he's going to miss time. So what's the plan? I'm looking at the names right now. Is it Carter Warren? Is it Max Mitchell? Let's assume he's going to go down. Not hope that he doesn't. Let's assume he will. What's the plan there? And this is a great spot to be in with the Jets where they are, to get that franchise left tackle. And you won't need to feel pressure to put this guy on the field right away. You can develop him for a year. Ideally, it's a guy that has some versatility. Remember, Vera Tucker played some tackle at USC. A guy like Troy Fautanu from Washington might be a little rich for him at 10 overall, but that's kind of like one of the ideal fits of this class for them, is he can play some guard. And then at some point, if you need to shift him out to tackle, you do it. If Tyron Smith, that's what the Cowboys did with Tyler Smith. They drafted him a left tackle. They put him at guard until Tyron Smith inevitably went down, and it worked out for them for the most part. That's what the Jets were missing last year. So as sexy as Brock Bowers or one of these wide receivers will look on game day and training camp, which is with the Jets right now, they've been playing for the headlines in the offseason. But when it comes to Sundays in the fall, you need to make sure that you're protecting your most prized investment in Aaron Rodgers. So I think they have to start on the offensive line, and there will be a good value there. There's no question. There will be a good value when they're coming on the clock. But, further in the draft, I do think there's going to be a spot, an opportunity to add a wide receiver. Mike Williams, like the offensive lineman that were mentioned above, he's on a one-year deal, and he's proven two things in his career. He's really good in contested situations, and he's not going to stay healthy for the entire season. So what's the plan once he goes down? Again, same church, different pew here. Is what is the plan when he goes down? Don't hope he won't go down. And that's where you view these wide receivers. The acquisition of Hassan Reddick does take a little bit of pressure off of losing Bryce Huff, and hopefully Will McDonald can break out in year two. I would like to see them add talent to two spots on that defense, even though it's already a formidable unit. Defensive line. I know Javon Kinlaw and Fotu can hold the fort. Solomon Thomas is okay. But with to get the most out of Quinnen Williams, it seems like they just keep on inserting these kind of busts from previous teams that can do some work here, some work there. But hey, next year we're going to have to find another guy. Let's get someone in here that we can be next to Quinnen Williams for the next 2-3 years. They're also very thin at safety behind Chuck Clark, who's coming off of torn ACL, and Tony Adams. That there's going to be a spot in the draft where the value meets the grade at safety. So that's another spot that I do think, because losing Whitehead to Tampa Bay was not a huge loss on paper, but when you look at how thin that group is and they're one injury away from having nothing, that would scare me a little bit. So safety is another spot I think they can look at rounds 3 through 6.
Yeah, and Ashton Davis is still out there. I think they could sign him, and that would get rid of that
still
issue.
there. Yep.
And I agree with you 100%. It's not going to be Brock Bowers. It's going to be an offensive lineman. And maybe the best thing for them to do is trade down. You can still pick an offensive lineman and recoup that second-round draft pick that you don't have, and you can draft a receiver in the second round.
Right. The tackle, I think this is a great spot for Fashanu from Penn State. And it's funny, my initial comparison I have on him from last year was Deprecashaw Ferguson. That's who I think he can turn into. And I don't know if I want him on the field right away, but I do want him on the field next year. And this is a great spot for him to do that.
Okay, Kansas City is next. And the Chiefs, the two-time defending champs, they need more draft picks. They should just skip the draft. John.
Yeah, let's do that. Why don't we move on to Pittsburgh? Kansas City, from what I understand, they're looking for more wide receivers. As if they need them. But obviously they got Hollywood, Brown, but they are going to. From what I understand, they're going to address that position in the draft. They've got Rashee Rice, who was, okay. Watson is, so-so. I think they want to get another big play wide receiver. And I think they're going to use the draft to do it, especially in a year with really good receivers. They need offensive line help. They've got Orlando Brown is not returning. I didn't see. He didn't come back. He's gone, isn't he?
No. Yeah. Do you think Wanya Morris? Did you like him coming out last year?
Right, Wanya Morris. Yeah, he's back. Okay, and then they're also looking at Taylor is a fairly good player, but I think they want to upgrade that tackle position. I don't think they're totally satisfied with that. That's something they're looking at. Running back, they've been running back by committee in a lot of years. Obviously, Pacheco was a great player last year, but I think they want to upgrade running back as well. They want a little more depth. They really not a whole lot behind him that's been solid. So that's a position that they're going to look at in the draft. I'm not 100% sure if that's going to be a primary need. But if it was me, I'm looking at Kansas City. I think that's an area that they've got to address. They got Chris Jones in the middle, is one of the best three techniques in football. But the depth is not great. And I know Spags likes to play a rotation. So they're going to look at the edge and they're going to look at defensive tackle in the draft as well. But again, this is a solid roster. They're one of the best teams in the history of the game. So it's not going to take that much to keep them at the top, and I think they can pick up another elite receiver in this draft, like pick up one of those great ones at the bottom of the first round. That's going to just make Mahomes that much more dangerous.
All right, the Chargers are next, and the Jim Harbaugh era is beginning. I know this is Joe Hortis as the GM, and he had a really interesting development with Baltimore all those years. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of draft he puts together with Harbaugh, Tucker. I'm a Michigan fan, so I have a really good idea of how Jim Harbaugh wants to build this team. But you tell me, what do you think they're going to be looking for in the draft? Because they have a pretty high draft pick.
Yeah, so they're kind of rebuilding, sort of. I mean, they have like one of the best quarterbacks, but they're kind of at a weird spot because they had so much cap tied to star players. That's why they had to get rid of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. But I think with Harbaugh coming in and with Greg Roman, I think that the philosophy will be more focused on the trenches. Offensive line and defensive line both are their biggest needs, I'd say, alongside, I'd say, receiver and cornerback as well. Mainly the biggest losses they had was Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So their wide receiver room is pretty bare bones right now. Quentin Johnson from last year, who didn't have a great rookie year. He still has potential. And then they have Joshua Palmer and Darius Davis slotted in as starters. So it has very kind of little experience, and I could see them getting a few guys in the middle rounds, or taking Malik Neighbors fifth. It's definitely an option. I kind of like them going like Joe Alt or something like that, because that kind of fit their Harbaugh's philosophy, I think. otherwise, like the left side of their line is really good, Rashawn Slater and Zion Johnson, but Corey Linsley is probably going to retire this offseason. They brought in Bradley Bozeman to compete with Brendan James for center. But it's mainly the right side that kind of struggled last year. Pipkins has kind of been a not an ideal starter, but he's been there for the last many years now starting. And Sawyer was really good at left tackle filling in for Slater, but he wasn't as good at guard. So it'll be interesting to see how they address those spots specifically. I thought it was good to replace. They let Gerald Everett walk and brought in Disley and Hurst, so that'll help their receiving room. They let Eckler walk and got Gus Edwards, obviously familiar with Roman in Baltimore. And then, I don't know, the biggest is like Asante Samuel is going to be a starter, but then nickel with Jasir Taylor and right cornerback Christian Fulton, they could definitely upgrade either of those spots. And then the D-line is very much like their first stringers are more of like rotational guys, right? I mean, in my opinion. It's like Morgan Fox and Puna Ford were both kind of second string, like top backup guys. They don't really have like a star there on their D-line. They brought back Bosa and Khalil Mack on the edge, which was really, really helpful for them. But other than that, they kind of have a lot of places they could go. But it makes sense that it's probably, like, I feel like fifth pick is going to be like Neighbors or Alt if they don't trade back. But yeah, it'll be really cool to see how, like, what their plan is, especially since they have Herbert, who's a really exciting player, obviously.
Yeah, I would be, tell you the truth, again, knowing Harbaugh, I'd be surprised, very surprised, if he used a top 5 pick on a wide receiver. I don't see it. I think definitely the alt idea makes more sense. And if you trade down a few spots, someone wants to come up there to get McCarthy, trade down a couple spots, you could still pick your tackle, or you pick Brock Bowers. The Will Disley signing should not be an accident. He's like the best blocking tight end in the NFL, and he spent the most money so far in free agency on a tight end. That's Jim Harbaugh. That's what he wants to do. So, yeah, imagine Disley and Bowers back there, that combo. I could see something like that. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what the Chargers do, but this could be a trade-down possibility. All right, next up, as we start to dwindle down, only a few left. So, Dave, you've got the Tennessee Titans, general manager Rand Carthon, the new head coach Brian Callahan. They've made a bunch of moves already. It's been an exciting offseason.
Yeah, they've been very aggressive in adding talent on both sides of the ball to the skill positions. I mean, you bring in Calvin Ridley, Tony Pollard. In the defensive backfield, you sign Uze from Cincinnati. You trade for L'Jarius Sneed. And the biggest issue on this team is the offensive line. But I'll tell you what, the biggest acquisition this team has made is offensive line coach Bill Callahan, who is Brian's father. And if you look at his last 2 stops, Cleveland and Washington, very early in his tenure with those teams, they used their first-round pick on an offensive lineman. Washington did it with Brandon Scherf in 2016, and in 2020, the Cleveland Browns did it with Jedrick Wills. Titans are sitting in a spot where they are guaranteed, as guaranteed as you can be at this point, to get the first or second offensive lineman on their board, and that is by far the biggest need. Even though they used their first rounder on left guard Peter Skoronski last year, their left tackles allowed 88 pressures between a crew of guys last year, and they haven't added anything at tackle. They've added a couple of interior guys. They also lost center Aaron Brewer, who was their top lineman, and they replaced him with Cushenberry from Denver, who's in my opinion is actually a downgrade. Sadiq Charles is a guy I loved coming out of LSU, but he has not put it together, so you don't even know if he's going to be a starter. So this team could go heavy on offensive line, including with their first pick. The issue, they don't have a third rounder this draft or next draft. Last year, they don't have one this year because of the trade up for Will Levis last year, and they don't have the 2025 third because of the trade for L'Jarius Sneed. So you kind of put yourself in this position where you have to use a pick on tackle with their first rounder. I mean, I think that's one of the guarantees of the draft.
Yeah.
No-brainer. This is a team I think could use some help at edge rusher. I do like Harold Landry. I do like Arden Key. I think they're great complements to each other. I would love if Arden Key was my number 3 guy, though. I don't know if I would want him to be an absolute starter. And behind them, you have Rashad Weaver, who had a 6% pressure rate last year. I mean, he really has not put it together in his 3 years in the league now. And that's usually the sign where if a guy hasn't put it together in 3 years, you can start to kind of count him out. And if you look at rest of the names, I mean, there's just nothing there. So it's a pretty bare room. The injuries crushed the defensive line in 2023. Nobody on that unit played 14 games. They got almost zero pass rush from anyone outside of Jeffrey Simmons. Sebastian Joseph Day is signed. He's not a pass rusher. He's never had a 10% pressure rate. So, similar to a couple teams I've already talked about, they just need pass rush help. I prefer the outside, but if they can get someone that can complement Jeffrey Simmons inside, you go for it. But those are the needs where it's just going to be as many guys that start with the play with their hand in the dirt. If they meet the grade, Tennessee will bring them in.
You think they want to upgrade Molden at free safety?
I'm not sure what their plan is at safety, especially with the trade of Byard last year. I think that was more of a financial move. I do think that it's going to be in the picture after they solve the line issues on both sides of the ball. I mean, it's, I can't imagine a scenario where a safety in this class especially would exceed a grade of someone that would help out their offensive and defensive line issues.
Yeah. Offensive line. I mean, come on. That's thing. That would shock everybody.
Easy.
If they didn't go that way. All right, let's wrap it up with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And John, you've got the last team for the AFC on our video here this week. So what do you think the Steelers need to do in the draft?
I'm glad Dave mentioned a good Benedictine alum, Bill Callahan. But anyway, the Steelers are an interesting team. I'm trying to think back in my years of watching football going back to the 1950s. I can think of only a few times where a team has cleaned out the entire quarterback room going into the next season. I mean, everybody that played quarterback for the Steelers is somewhere else right now, which is interesting. So I'm looking at that room right now, and I'm seeing, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, who I think ultimately might be the starter, but these are short-term guys. They're going to have to be. You're going to figure out what you're going to do with, and I kind of almost believe this might be a short-term thing for them at quarterback. I think they're going to draft one down the line. See if one of those guys they can hit on, or at least bring somebody in the camp. It's not prime need because they're going to go with what they got, but nevertheless, that's an issue. Wide receiver has been an issue. They brought in a couple of players from Atlanta, in terms of Jefferson, and then they brought Watkins in from the Eagles. But I still think they need more. They're going to have to address that position. They lost a couple of players, from last year. In Deontay Johnson being traded, he was kind of a little bit of a problem at times, but he had some skill, so that's a loss. So we'll see what these new guys can do. But that's an area I think they're going to address, especially with such great talent there. They brought in Patrick Queen. And that's an upgraded linebacker. They've had injury issues with Holcomb, but Holcomb is a solid player. But when he's on the field, so I think they really upgraded the linebacker core with Patrick Queen, and Holcomb could possibly play the other side. And the edge, you got two great ones in Highsmith, and T.J. Watt. I mean, these are two phenomenal players, and they've got decent depth. So I don't know that they're going to do anything on the defensive line. Secondary has been a problem. They brought in, a couple of new guys that I think can help them, Deshaun Elliott and Deontay Jackson in the trade with the Eagles. It's Elliott, the quality safety, and he's going to help teaming with Fitzpatrick. Joey Porter is an excellent corner, and they have some decent depth. The nickel situation, they really don't have anybody there that has any experience at all. Guy coming off the practice squad in Bush. So they're going to have to draft a corner, somebody that can play that nickel spot, can step in there right away. And there's some nice big nickel types, in this draft down the line. So I look for the Steelers, to address that. And they would probably like to get another rotational edge rusher, although I'm not sure that's the strength of this draft. But I think that's something that they're going to look at. Offensive line, I think they're going to look at interior, more so than tackle. They've gotten really good play out of Jones, and Moore. Those two guys are pretty good players. They need a guard, and they need depth. So they're going to address that. Center position wasn't very good, but Herbig has moved into that spot, and I think he's going to be okay. And, and I think on the edge, the other Herbig, I think he's going to help him. He's going to develop, I think, into a real solid player before it's over. So, but I still think they're going to look for another one of those somewhere down the line in the draft.
Yeah, and keep in mind, it's important to note that Arthur Smith is now the new offensive coordinator, and nobody ran less 3 wide receiver sets than Arthur Smith and Atlanta. So it'll be interesting to see how much he transforms that offense. A little bit in 2024 or a lot. That'll be interesting to see how he does that.
Well, he brought one of his guys with him, from Atlanta.
Yep.
So I mean that's gonna help with the transition. But it's a big turnover, for Pittsburgh. We'll see how that works out.
All right, that's gonna wrap it up. So again, here it is, draft guide, Ourlads.com. All you have to do is go to that section on the homepage, just click it, and you're there. And then you can decide whether or not you want a PDF or you want a hard copy or both. And you also got the draft review guide that comes out, which, again, we're going to be working on heavily right after the draft. That comes out in June. So you want to get a head start on that, too. So, again, that's over at Ourlads.com. And find us over there. And also find us next week. So that's why you need to subscribe to this channel. So not sure, we haven't yet decided what day that we're going to have the show. So make sure to subscribe so you'll be alerted with a notification as well. So click that notification. And if you enjoyed the video, then please share it, like it. But again, most of all, subscribe. So I want to thank all of our panel for cooperating here over the last hour on the AFC. And it's the NFC next week, gentlemen. So appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.